Okay, so I'm not going to mention what I'm actually talking about in this video because I think that for whatever reason, TikTok doesn't want me to. But I'm going to share some thoughts I have about this and hopefully you guys can piece it together. So right now, there was a video going around where this leftist who's in a little bit of hot water for, being racist, common conversation we end up having on here, is making the argument that the criticism that she's receiving right now is why so many people leave the left and end up going to MAGA. And here's the thing. We do need to grant this premise. We do need to entertain the reality, which is that there are a lot of people, let's just be frank, we're talking about white people. There are a lot of white people who maybe grew up more conservative because of their family, right? They grew up in bastions of whiteness where they were separated from people of color and they were able to be really ignorant about some shit. Then they went away to college, right? Then they started to meet different people and then they started to shift a little bit more to the left. And that process for them was a lot of work. It was really, really stressful because they started to know certain people from these groups because they broke out of their white bastion and went into a more diverse community. They were able to kind of start to really genuinely develop a bit of empathy, right? But now we're in a situation where stuff is starting to get kind of real for a lot of people. And some of us who actually suffer under this have to sort of make a decision about who exactly we give our time, energy, attention, and consideration to. And the problem with the situation we're in right now is the amount of time that it genuinely takes for someone to really, truthfully, realistically unpack bias versus the amount of time we really have, right, between now and when things get so much worse is actually quite small, right? It's very, very small. And so there are a lot of people who are sick of seeing, for example, the anti-Blackness on the leftist side because they recognize that it's actually now going to end up becoming a liability, right? Anti-Blackness, especially right now, I think some people, for whatever reason, haven't pieced this together, is substantially more dangerous to Black people, right? And some people who have shifted their perspective over the years to be more left look at some of the criticism that Black people have of what they're doing, and they get frustrated and they become angry that people aren't celebrating them for their growth. And suddenly the position they used to be in starts to seem a little bit more, safe for them. And that's because that's where they actually are, right? They're really only willing to do these things if it keeps them safe. And I think that over the years, we've tried to have conversations about performative activism. We've tried to have conversations about how you may be making these posts online, but for people who have an interaction with you, sometimes they experience that you still have ism. And then people do this thing. And this is what's really frustrating, where instead of hearing that criticism, they stomp their feet and say, but I've changed so much, but I'm so much less racist than my friends and family that I've walked away from in order to be on the left, right? And I don't think that a lot of people who have this mentality register that when you treat anti-Blackness as a conversation that we can never have at any stage of anything, you really are solidly communicating that you are racist. And what's a bit frustrating to me, the meta conversation about a lot of this is, a lot of you just don't want to admit that you're racist. And I'm not trying to say that as like some sort of power thing that I'm not trying to, some people think that whenever we do this thing where we call people racist, it's about us gaining something from it, right? Like there's this way that a lot of white people literally cannot comprehend people talking about racism without trying to make money about it or trying to draw attention to themselves or just try, self victimhood, right? Like a lot of white people, they genuinely struggle to comprehend two really basic things, right? They struggle to comprehend that they are racist, and as an extension of that, maybe because of that, they struggle to understand how deep-seated racism is. A lot of people have not really registered that when you are a white person organizing something that is predominantly about the de-radicalization of white people, right? And you view anti-blackness as a conversation that is a waste of time, that is derailing, that is ruining things, that is, making, a bigger issue of something that doesn't need to be made a big issue of. All you're going to cultivate naturally is a group of people who are racist. And I think that that's what people are always trying to communicate to you. And trust me, look, you guys, I've been around for a while. I've had these conversations for so long. It's the same conversation over and over and over again in the same response. You have these people who want the street cred for being anti-racist, but then when they move in ways that seem racist, they point at the things that they only did performatively as evidence of them not being racist, not understanding that there were certain decisions that you would just make if you weren't racist, right? See, the problem is, and I think this is actually kind of another meta conversation, we've started to think of politics as this thing that we perform, this set of actions, these posts that we make on the internet, right? Making sure that we put pronouns in our bio or say free Palestine, right? But there's our actions that I think, in my opinion, matter so much more. You can say that you are opposed to anti-blackness, but when you constantly treat Black people as if they exist in a paternal position beneath you, as if they could never possibly comprehend the little bit of experience that you have, right? As if every one of their concerns is a derailment, as if every single thing they have to contribute is not really something that should be focused on or centered, but simply something that should be, hand waved and acknowledged publicly as a show of performance of your so-called anti-blackness, right? You have to understand that when it's all performative, it's never actually useful. And that's kind of what we're talking about here. And the mistake I think some people make is they pretend. And here's really what I really want to communicate in this video. I do wish that more leftists were honest about them being racist, right? And I'm not one of these people who's like, oh my God, leftists are racist or whatever. Like, I'm not. I already know that there's a good amount of people who are leftists who are not doing the bullshit that's on here. When I say this, I'm really referring to this brand of TikTok leftist that ends up getting the most fucking attention, and they get the most attention for a reason, right? So many of you are just, you're doing this thing where you conflate your marketability under capitalism in a white supremacist system with having the most important, most experienced, most informed voice in the conversation. And it's not true. And I honestly do think that for some of these white creators, there is a degree of envy they have. And I've never really been able to explain what this is. I do think sometimes they have like an envy for how Black women especially are tapped into like the source, right? They're tapped into what it actually feels like to be oppressed in this country. And some of these people, they have to read about it. And I think that what happens is whenever we have these conversations, they always think that we're having them to destroy whatever they're doing because it's a grift for most of them, right? They never think that we're just trying to help you do better. It's always antagonistic. And if you read some of those messages, you really do get that understanding that they are never really able to really ever hear that criticism from Black people is not necessarily cancellation. I've had that conversation so many times on here. There have been so many times I've tried to have dialogue with white leftists on here, and instead it's been interpreted as beef or antagonism. And we're really never going to go anywhere until you guys work on that. Yeah, so like, let's talk about this real quick. So something that's been kind of interesting for me to process through a lot of these conversations is that I'm realizing Black people are way more relevant and important to a lot of the fabric of certain conversations than a lot of people are willing to acknowledge. You know, like, so many people seem to be basing a lot of the way that they move around Black people, whether it's positive or negative, right? You have people on the left who are actually using their indifference to anti-racism as a way to court people to their version of the left. Then you also have people on the right who are obsessed with utilizing racism as a way of getting people to vote against their best interest, right? And these people, you know, take Black people out of the conversation, some of this stuff works a little bit less functionally. Do you know what I mean? Too many people rely on Black people existing as sort of a permanent lower person, you know, something that exists beneath, right? They don't really want to entertain the premise of a Black person being equal, not really, because they both sort of rely on a Black person's inequity, right? Democrats rely on racism existing on the right to sort of argue, oh, this is why you should vote for us, right? People on the right need racism in order to get people on who would probably be on the left if their politics are reflective of their class, right? And racism allowed a lot of them to think, okay, these billionaires are on our sides, billionaires who have screwed them for centuries. They were suddenly able to be like, oh, well, these billionaires are on our side. Why? Because they both don't like Black people, right? It's actually kind of becoming a little funny, and I've been saying this a lot recently, but one of the, I think, unintended effects of the right becoming so vocally and loudly racist right now has been that for me personally, I'm not really offended by white supremacy anymore, because it's like, it's an inferiority complex. Do you know what I mean? Like, these people do not understand that the world would function if they let go of white supremacy. Like, they have such little faith in it, right? Like, in this conversation, contextually, right, you have people who are in the Unfuck America tour who are in so many ways saying that racism is so central to both the people that they're trying to reach and the people within the organization that it's not really productive for them to organize against it, right? It's not really productive for them to remove those people, because at the end of the day, these racist white people on the right aren't really going to listen to Black people, right? They don't really give a fuck about Black people, right? So it doesn't really actually matter to them that these people are being anti-Black, right? Then you got people on the right who have been telling these people forever that the biggest issue in America is people of color, right? Like, I just saw something about Section 8. Apparently they're getting rid of Section 8, right? So many people believe that the only people on Section 8 are Black people, right? I've never been on public assistance. I've never been on public assistance, right? Personally, right? I've known a lot of white people who have been, right? There are so many people who are on public assistance, so many people who are included under things like DEI that are outside of just Black people who are being harmed right now, right? And these people were able to use their racism to get these people to vote against their rights. You know, it's all just very interesting to me. It's all just very entertaining to me. Because at the end of the day, white supremacy is a death cult. And these people are holding on to it desperately because it's like one of their only main sources of power. That's really what it comes down to, right? A lot of white people have such a small vision of what the future could be that they genuinely cannot figure out what the world would look like without white supremacy. So much to the point where they are willing to let it thrive purely so they can continue having the conversations they're having. Like, really, you know, get somebody else to do it. You know, that's how I'm feeling at this point. So I wanted to continue my conversation about this topic because for me, this is something that's very perceptible. It's very obvious. This comment says, white tea leftists treat conservatives like prized birds and black people like the nuances, nuisances, scaring them off, Freudian slip. As if it's our fault that people can't progress when their love for anti-blackness is the roadblock of all. I've been thinking a lot about this over the past couple of days because my nuanced brain forces me to always acknowledge the fact that people can change. It also forces me to acknowledge the fact that when people change, they truly can adjust to an honest position where they feel the opposite of how they previously felt, right? Like, I never want to be a person who believes that that doesn't happen. What I've recognized over the years, and I don't know if people pick this up, but like, I talk about a lot of different things, but I'm usually kind of having the same conversation more often than not. And what I've realized is when you have a situation where that is true, where people genuinely have reasons not to know certain things and genuinely can have the potential to change, to take on a different position, right? What's kind of required in that is always this acceptance of how some of the bullshit that ultimately harms other people is sort of necessary in order to get there. And always when you accept this premise that this is something that is understandable as opposed to something that we should reject outright, right? We're always leaving space for those people who could be harmed by these bad ideas to be harmed over and over and over again. And on the right, we have people who say we need to remove DEI, we need to remove education about race, we need to remove harsh conversations about racism because it's negative, it makes people feel bad, and because we are trying to move forward basically with a different version of our history, which is a celebration of a type of unity that we've never really had. This idea that things are now fully equal for everyone, blindly, because the law says so, not because of the tangible reality of how these systems work, right? So we're all supposed to just grab our flags, be proud of the fact that we don't live somewhere in Africa that is not as well off, and carry on with our day, right? So what that does is it allows these people to have a type of oppression that now no longer gets to be socially criticized or acknowledged, right? So what that functionally means for Black people is that when they pursue education and they're rejected, when they pursue employment and are rejected, when they pursue housing and they're rejected, they have no real recourse, no real thing to point at and say, this is why this is happening, even when we know that that's what's happening, right? It's this deniability thing, right? On the left, you have people who say, well, we have people who feel that way on the right who want to come over here, right? And even though we probably do need to have conversations about how the dehumanization of people is necessary for genocide and how Black folks being dehumanized in this country has been used as a template for genocide across the world, right? And, you know, even though that's the reality that we live in, right? We still need to pander to these people who ultimately kind of see racism as a sales point. Because what I think a lot of people are not understanding really, and when I say this is me granting a premise I probably shouldn't grant them. I'm acknowledging in this moment that I'm probably part of the problem by even going down this path. But I recognize that for a lot of these people who are invested in the deprogramming of these people on the right, that's their family. Those are their friends, right? These are people who they do hold a degree of sympathy, empathy, care, and consideration for, that they do place above people of color and always will, right? Like, I was just watching this video by Good Trouble, who, you know, has positive things, sometimes has misses, right? But he came into a live with the people who are part of the Unfuck America tour and was like, hey, this guy who's on your tour is doing some racist shit. And it was interesting to watch because I think what's fascinating about racism that makes it kind of hard to discuss, and part of why I think we have so many of these conflicts, is part of the way that it functions, part of the way that it thrives, is that you're not supposed to notice it. You're supposed to see it as like the natural state of things, right? So going back to Z, right? When Z came into that live full of Black women and then said, well, unlike you, I have experience with political organizing, right? Not understanding that the people in the group, probably because they're a Black woman, have experience with political organizing, right? That is a reflection of the way that white people are socialized to sort of see their work as always carrying more value, more weight, always being more strenuous, even when it's not as useful, right? This guy jumping into this ape persona when he was talking about the shit he was talking about, right? Very easy not to see that as racist, because I'm just picking an ape, but there's a reason why you would pick that, right? And whenever we talk about this, there are people on the left who see these conversations as a nuisance, and they say, oh my God, you guys are just fucking nitpicking. You guys are making a big thing out of something small, not understanding that the big thing being made small is how we got here. Because racism is big. The idea that Black people are inherently lesser than white people is big, but it's a big thing that a lot of people don't notice, right? Like, do you understand? Like, there's reasons people feel this way. There's a history of forbidding Black people from gaining education, right? So naturally you would assume that a white person would be more educated than a Black person, that a white person probably knows more what they're talking about, right? Not understanding that Black people being forbidden from education actually encouraged many of them, when they had the opportunity to get education, to take it a lot more seriously than the white people who frankly often have felt forced into it, right? And so then you end up having these adults who are twice as good, who have studied twice as hard, next to these other adults who are white, who maybe did study but not quite as hard, who are actually the ones who are the recipients of what they imagine to be DEI and affirmative action doing. They are people who intrinsically do not have to work as hard, that are given way more support, way more value, way more benefit than the people who need to work hard, right? But even though that's the case, even though Black folks, because of this situation, can bring really useful, productive, functional, things to the conversation, about people on the left, right? Bringing people to the left, we're dismissed. Why? Because we ultimately believe that a white person is better at the job. And the reality is the people who need to be de-radicalized also believe that white people are best for the job. So I'm kind of noping out of this conversation in many ways because I've recognized that y'all are really going to have to sort through this. And I can't really be part of it because either way, regardless of the side, neither of you will protect me. I was just watching a video by a Black woman who's talking about some of the stuff that I'm not going to get into by name because I don't think I can on here. But one point that she made was it is so interesting, the difference in the way that people interact with white people and Black people in this conversation, because the way people have been talking about white folks who are MAGA and also white leftists in general, there's this desire to baby them. There's this desire to make it so that they never really feel like anyone's being too harsh, right? Like we have to reach across the table with MAGA. We have to be understanding of, white leftists who make mistakes because we're supposed to sort of accept whatever they're doing as part of the greater good that we should all be working towards, right? But when it comes to Black folks, y'all are so unforgiving. Y'all expect for Black folks to not just remain perfect, but to actually tolerate and swallow racism. That's the interesting thing about this, right? Because let's say someone was being microaggressive, which they were. We're not going to get into all the how and why, but let's just say that, right? Wouldn't it be a good idea for you to know that if you're someone who doesn't want to be doing that, right? Like, to me, that's the piece that doesn't really make sense. If you're committing a microaggression and you genuinely care about shifting that, why is it a bad thing for someone to call it out and draw it to your attention? Seriously, why? Right? Why? And I think that this kind of is reflective of like a lot of the other thoughts I've had around this. A lot of these conversations that we've been having since Trump has gotten elected, I've already started to feel this way, but they've really, successfully done it at this point. I don't feel intimidated by white people. I don't buy into the premise of white supremacy because really it's an inferiority complex. It's an inferiority complex because so many white folks require like such a sharp degree of babying and hand-holding and soft speaking and butt patting, right? Like y'all require so much of that. And it's funny, like someone's getting on here talking about they have Black fatigue, and the Black fatigue is listening to Black people talk about their experience with racism, right? Like, so you're fatigued, but Black people can't be tired of experiencing a systemic form of oppression. But you're tired. Like, there's this way where white supremacy is really about maintaining white delicacy and white sensibilities, right? It's really not about anything more than that. And that's really loud in this conversation because some of you were able to sort of see the bad in Kamala Harris, right? You were able to see that her politics were bad when some of us were saying, hey, we disagree with some of her policies, but she's not Donald Trump, and maybe that's a meaningful difference, right? You weren't willing to do that for Kamala. You are willing to do that in the context of some white person who is, I guess, throwing an event on college campuses and collecting money for voter registration. Like, that is a worthwhile thing that's worth dismissing the anti-blackness, right? Meanwhile, why are we talking about this? Why was this a point of conversation? Because Black women's voices were being removed from college campuses, because Black education is being removed from college campuses, and because our perspectives aren't going to be on college campuses in the way that they once were, right? Black folks have always lived through very tangibly, functionally different circumstances, but white folks get to be incredibly sensitive, and that is supposed to always outweigh whatever tangible pain a Black person has gone through. It's funny, I do appreciate a lot of these conversations because it allows me to feel really liberated away from like any little part of me that was kind of, still entertaining certain premises about, people not really being bigoted, right? Like, I think for the white leftist folks, like, there are going to be people who are going to require a lot more time. And I don't got time. I don't got patience. At this point, right? It's not even about, I need you to agree with me. I need you to love me. I need you to, it's not about that. It's about, at this current point in the timeline, things are starting to get scary. And I'm starting to feel like you're one of the people who's going to say, oh, she's over here. This is her location. I don't feel safe around y'all. Because what you demonstrate in so many of these conversations is how eager you are to throw Black women under the bus. And it's crazy because while you do that, you demand that we tolerate bigotry to swallow it for the common good. And you are so used to not caring about Black folks that you don't even see how terrible that is. You don't see it. And that's why it's not, y'all have your little thing over there. I'm good over here.